Morning, everyone. Thanks for being here bright and early on a sort of semi-monsoon Delhi morning. We're the first panel of the day, and we're going to try and wake you guys up. To set the stage for the discussion on mobile first or mobile only businesses, I thought we could touch on a few stats around the state of mobile today. Many of you would be familiar with some of the aspects of mobile internet penetration, etc. But I just thought it'd be important to touch on a couple of these, and then we'll jump into the discussion. So, some of us who've been involved in the industry for 20 odd years, like I have, I was looking at the data back in 1995, and globally there were 80 million mobile subscribers, 80 million. That represented 1% penetration in the world of mobile telecom. If you fast forward to 2014, that number was 5.2 billion people, which represents a penetration of 73% of the world's population as a mobile device. Interestingly, 40% of those are actually smartphone devices. So it's a very, very large base of smartphone-enabled users around the world. As of last year, technically, the internet use on mobile exceeded internet use on desktop and laptop. So on average, the user is spending about 3 hours of a day on the mobile internet versus 2.5 hours on a desktop or laptop and about 0.4 hours on other connected devices. So about 51% of internet consumption is on a mobile device. Jumping to India, we're somewhere in the territory of 900 million mobile users, and 15% of that is smartphone enabled. Interestingly, as you think about things like internet traffic, in India, 65% of all traffic on the internet comes from a mobile device, versus 30% in China and only 22% in the US. So clearly, India seems to be a mobile-first economy already, if you guys hadn't figured that out. As it relates to transactions, 41% of all e-commerce transactions in India are coming from a mobile device. And if you look at e-commerce, most of the majors are talking about anywhere from 60 to 80% of their transactions, including people like Flipkart and Snapdeal, are saying 70+% of their transactions in Q1 came from a mobile phone, right? So, that data definitely tells a story about how internet in India, has clearly leaped forward from a mobile device perspective. And given that we have, a very interesting panel here today that actually play different roles across different sectors, I thought we could start out by asking each of them to describe what does mobile first mean to you in the context of your organization? And so maybe Subra, if you want to start on that end, we hear a lot about it, but if you can just touch briefly upon what does it mean for you guys?
Sure, thanks Rahul. I think just to set the context, our category is a transactional category. It has a few attributes. The value of a transaction varies from 8,000 rupees to 10,000 rupees, and in terms of the category's behavior itself, it's a need-based category, right? So for a vertical like ours, the current data that we are seeing is 55% of traffic is mobile, and 45% of transactions is on mobile, right? So, and if you look at the last 18 months, even for a high transaction size category like ours, the month-on-month kind of increase is like 3-4% in terms of what we have seen in terms of increase on mobile, right? So that's kind of the current context of what it means. So obviously mobile first, it's not a strategy, right? It's like imminent, it's business critical now. And I think what's important is in terms of what, it's a predominant segment. So in terms of product thinking, resources, a lot of that has to be invested in mobile. So for us, like almost 65 to 70% of either dev resources or marketing resource is kind of put on mobile, and the entire company we're gearing up just to kind of think for a predominant channel or segment which is mobile. So just to give and just from a product thinking standpoint, irrespective of whether desktop or mobile, like whichever is the dominant category or dominant channel or segment, like the thinking needs to kind of accommodate that. We started our journey on mobile in 2010 with the HTML5 mobile site, right? So at that point of time, we said we want to kind of halve the transaction time that can be done on the mobile compared to that of the desktop. So that kind of meant we had to introduce like stored cards or expressway that we call, where you can store the card at the mobile phone itself, right? So this was before I think mobile first became mobile first. We had kind of started thinking around that path. How can you optimize for that channel? So I think it's all about whatever is the predominant channel, just gear your resources around that, and that's kind of what we're doing right now.
Hello. So for us, you know, we've actually started out as an aggregator, meta search in multiple categories, including flights, hotels, buses, and one of the things we realized around 2012, when mobile was just about taking off, which is it had gone from 5% to 15% of our traffic in 1 year. We realized that the real opportunity in our sector in travel is going to lie with the next 300 million internet users. Because when we looked at the number of people taking a flight every year in India, that number went up from 40 million 5 years ago to 68 million last year. When you look at the number of trips happening on a train or buses, or you know, number of people staying in a budget hotel, and you know, you look at the fact that device ownership there was close to 0 5 years ago, and today, you know, it's reaching 30% penetration. You know, that's where the real opportunity that we spotted, you know, was by when we looked at it in 2012. So in 2013, we came up with multiple apps to address, you know, gaps in various sectors. And today we get about 80% of our travel queries from mobile. We do almost 55% of our transactions through mobile. In terms of our revenues, it's heavily skewed towards mobile. If I look at time spent, if I look at page views, engagement, you know, mobile is definitely, you know, more than desktop by a factor of 6 to 8 times, right? So people are spending 6 to 8 times the amount of time, they're coming back 6 to 8 times more frequently, you know, and they're actually spending 6 to 8 times more amount of time inside our apps, you know, as compared to what they're doing on the web. And you know, travel is such a category where, you know, personalization and instant sort of needs define, you know, how you actually use the category, right? So when it comes to things like trains, buses, cabs, you know, the use case is clearly mobile and mobile only. And there we are strongly thinking about, you know, doing away with desktop. But when you look at flights, which is a legacy category, which is people like us who have grown up on desktop and find it hard to give it up. You know, that's where I think, you know, our sector at least is facing a challenge in saying that can we ever shut it down one day?
We'll come to the tough questions later.
Yeah. So, you know, so just to come back, I think one of the things that has happened in the last couple of years is we've had to refactor the way we think internally, not just on the product and technology, but also on the business side, by looking at mobile as, you know, the lens through which you look at everything in your business. To the extent that, you know, our QA team is spending more time on their devices, and they have a bunch of devices lying around. I think they are hardly using the desktop anymore. And I think that's the fundamental shift required in most businesses which have been around, because we've all grown up, you know, doing everything on our desktops, to the extent that when you reach your office desk, the first thing you should be doing is firing up the app and testing it out there. And that's a psychological shift. It's not easy to make developers do that, or business people do that. But you know, that's the struggle that we've sort of overcome in the last 1 year. Saying, when you start by thinking, is your product working well on the app? Can you, is that where you spend more time even in office than actually on your desktop?
I think I'll give a broader perspective, you know, just from our company or a product perspective. Mobile first is not really relevant. But you know, I've been in this domain from 2006, and I've really seen the shift of mobile advertising per se, and mobile first, right? I mean, I would say since 2006 we've been coding brands to say, okay, do you have so mobile first or mobile first strategy first and foremost begins with a mobile presence. Today it sounds really strange, but believe me, back then in 2006 or 2008 or 9 or 10 or 12, it was a task to convince people that, you know, you need to have a mobile presence, right? Today, the presence element has changed entirely to use case of my product. So if it is a here and now product, which means anything to do with the taxi category, recharge, payments, I probably don't even have a choice to not think of presence, right? So mobile first, I would say, has really come down to, thankfully, I think 2014 was the switch year. I think a big chunk was a lot of brands like, let's say, OLX. I mean, I remember OLX as being one of the first brands that took to TV and made mobile as a core product usage category. Like, the TV ad was all about taking a photo, uploading that, right? And no other device could have simplified that. So depending on the product categories, today mobile first is all about what is the use case for the app that I'm making? I'm saying app, right? I'm not even saying web. So it's mobile first has become a lot about core service, core business usage from just being a presence back in the days.
Okay.
So for us in the music streaming space, the switch was faster. I think the use case of using it on mobile is pretty significant there. 91% of Saavn consumption is now on mobile. In fact, when I joined the company, my first note to the team was, hey, in case you haven't noticed, we are now a mobile company. So, and in fact, I'd love to take your bite about getting engineers and product guys to test on the app while in the office and probably show it to my product and engineering team, because that's exactly what I've been harping about in the team as well. The important aspect for us to understand from an Indian ecosystem, mobile ecosystem point of view, is we are at, so if I were to draw a funnel, there is smartphone users, north of 100 million smartphone users now in the country. There is 3G users, which is probably north of 50 million 3G users in the country. And then there is active data streaming users, and that's where we fall. So that's probably north of about 30 million users at this point in time. So that's the base that we've been a part of, right? I think with 4G coming in at the top, and smartphone sales obviously continuing to grow at the pace at which it's growing, the smartphone base will grow up. I think 3G usage will go up because 3G prices will come down, so that 50 million number will probably go north of that and go closer to 100 million. And then the active data streaming user number will also go up. So that's kind of how the pie will start growing. And we've already been thinking about how do we continue to kind of take a larger pie of that active data streaming user in the ecosystem.
Should hire Taylor Swift. That's an Apple joke. I think you guys brought up some very interesting points about speed, the build, test, release cycle, how you're unbundling your desktop and actually turning it into micro apps, if you will. You talked about using television to promote a mobile app, which possibly is counterintuitive. And then, you talked about this growing base, but the eternal question for media companies like yourself is, when will you make money? And is advertising, going to get you there, or does it necessarily need transactions? So I think maybe at the top of this is this question of, can you actually survive as a mobile-only business? And I think to the gentleman on the far right, who have a legacy business, which was built around the desktop and built around kind of market-leading interface. How long do you sustain your web presence? Is that something that you can ever walk away from? Counterintuitively, a lot of the leading players, the Ubers of the world, have gone back and launched web presences. So, where are you seeing the Indian market, and can you afford to shut down your web presence completely?
Okay, you're certainly making us look old, but hopefully not. I think in terms of the web presence, it depends really on the category, right? So there are certain categories which are very amenable to mobile only, and that kind of works great. We've talked about a few examples, right? Commerce and in general, meaning whether it's e-commerce or travel commerce, meaning in our view, you cannot force a choice on the consumers. So consumers will decide what they want, and hence meaning economically it makes a lot of sense to go mobile only, right? Meaning in terms of retention, we've talked about lifetime value and all that, but at the fundamental, the philosophical level, do you want to force a consumer choice to say that, meaning we care about our economics, but we don't care about you. So I think that's kind of what the philosophy that at least at Cleartrip we've been very much vocal against. So in terms of internal resources, you can redeploy to mobile in a large way, right? We've kind of reskilled a lot of our engineers to kind of make the transition to mobile. But and in terms of web development itself, you don't have to kind of keep it at the same pace as a mobile kind of a presence. But I think you keep it minimal. At the same time, you put all your weight and resources behind a channel that's kind of growing. But I think at no point of time will we shut down our desktop work.
So, Alok, you've navigated this unbundling and added, if you will, micro apps. What does that do to a kind of team standpoint? Because, suddenly you've got multiple small teams working on different projects versus kind of a legacy build, test, release, and equally, it's hard to get people to update their apps. So, can you talk about the challenges of, being mobile first and kind of an app-led approach in a company that came from a desktop environment?
Sure. So I think in hindsight, the biggest challenge we faced when we were looking at mobile, entering mobile with apps, etc., whether to unbundle or not, was the fact that it's actually not the same consumer, right? So when we looked at certain personas of people who actually travel by trains and stay in budget hotels, or people who actually book cabs and then look at, are these the same people who are going to look at a bundled app and then think of that app top of the mind when they actually think of that use case? And the answer was no, that in some of these categories, when people think of one particular use case, they're going to think of one app. And there will be multiple apps trying to fight out just that micro category, right? So this is happening everywhere, right? I mean, Facebook, LinkedIn, everybody's unbundled into 7 to 10 apps now. And the reason is that if you want to be the winner on, let's say, buses, you got to have a bus app, right? If you want to be the winner on trains, you have to have a trains app. That's our way of thinking about it. And what that did inside the team was that it brought laser sharp focus both on the product side and on the marketing side in terms of who are we building for, what do they need, and how do you iterate for that guy, right? Instead of thinking of a generic persona that tries to do everything. And because at the end of the day, we realized that 80% of the users who come to it for that use case would anyway just click on that tab and use that part of the functionality. Why do you want to give them 20 MB that they will not use and give them, like 6 MB that will really solve their problem, right? Because you have to remember that some of these low-end devices, size is still the reason why you get uninstalled, right? So every 1 month they will sort by size. The top 10 apps are gone, unless it's Facebook, WhatsApp, of course. But that's the hard reality of the market. So you got to think of the average smartphone user. It's not people like us. It's actually some guy in Ranchi who's just bought a Micromax device, and this is his first time there. He has got a bunch of bundled apps already inside the device, and he has to think twice before downloading every new app because it costs him data. But if you can solve for a use case that guy uses, more than once a month, and you're the best app in that category, he's probably going to go for that, right? So that's the thinking behind it. Challenges, I think you have to maintain, multiple code bases, and you have to have, like you said, multiple small teams of people, and there's more management overhead as a result of that. But I think the trade-off in terms of how you are able to grow is actually worth it, because what I've seen is that when you're on the desktop, you follow a waterfall model saying that there's a build on that date, you're going to go live with a new release. Here, it's actually a function of constantly evolving requirements that keep flowing in from your users, because in the app world, you keep getting reviews and ratings every single day, right? You know what sucks and what doesn't, right? So you've got to launch a new release every 10 days, or your competitor will, and it's a constant battle, and it's actually a more real-time sort of development psychology as opposed to web. That's really helping iterate faster. Yeah.
I think just to add, like, say, let's say when, to answer, like, is mobile first a feasible strategy? I would say definitely yes. Now, there are kind of two kind of use cases, right? There are those services which have been around when it was all about the web or PC, right? And they have an evolution path, and they're obviously gradually evolving to it. Let's say, they already have 90% of usage coming from app. But let's say if you were a new startup, if you were, starting off, what would be the strategy you would take? I would say that, you have a massive resource crunch, right? So can I go out there and build my app and the web, and let's say if I was, and something to do with the IVR, would I work on 3 technologies, or would I just pick one, work on that, put in all my resources, all the way from development to promotion, right? I would rather focus it on one asset versus multiple assets. Because let's say every marketing dollar that I would spend, do I need to divide it between a web, visit or a app install, right?
So that's a good point, because you talk to most app companies or most companies, and their single largest challenge is driving downloads, right, and driving installs. And there is also a certain amount of app fatigue. I have 4 streaming music apps. Will I add a 5th and a 6th? I have 7 mini travel apps. Will I add an 11th one, right? So you talked about ROI. What are you seeing as strategies that are working for young companies to drive installs? How do you break out the clutter? What, many of them can't afford TV, right? So what do you feel is kind of the breakthrough thinking in terms of driving?
I think the biggest one is hope that you go organic and you grow.
But hope
just
is not a
yourself.
strategy, right? So,
Yeah.
so how do you get
So
there?
I think you've got to go back and say that, okay, look at, core pure marketing. Like, am I really solving a, use case? And then, like, to get that critical mass, there's no way you can do it with paid, right? So you've got to really hope that the service you've got in place is good enough to auto scale, right? That's the truest test, so to say. Obviously, thereafter, if you're a small startup, you will go with, let's say, a Facebook install would be the first step you would do. I'll explore a little bit of Google, and then I will go into a mobile display, right? I mean, you have the big boys doing 50,000 installs per day, right? Now, if I was a startup, could I even pull off 500? There are a lot of let's say Delhi-specific startups that, we help out, and maybe they're good with, like, hey, if I can just get 200 installs per day, that's fine, right? And then I have somebody who's trying to say that, okay, 20,000 installs per day doesn't work for me, I need like 40, 50, right? So, and by the time you're at that stage, you're probably, going to have to do a TV mix or a brand, So, core, I think marketing, like classical marketing, 4 Ps and all of that stuff, it's about product first, and kind of taking it on from there. And like, everybody here has done a TVC campaign, and it would be good to see what kind of learnings they had, because we've seen, let's say, the organics jump 3x, 4x when a brand has gone on and done a TV campaign, right? And
So we'll put Mahesh on the hot seat, given that he's been using TV for a streaming music app.
live campaign on right now.
So maybe, and you can just, you've been on both sides of the table. You've been on the media side. You're now, also trying to drive monetization. So give us a sense of, how you've been driving acquisition and whether or not the economics of that are making sense.
So I'll start by giving you a perspective on acquisition and growth. We measure everything. Everything is analytical, everything is data-led. So even TV is data-led. So we actually see the spikes. We actually measure the kind of cost of acquisition that we actually incur when we do TV. And we obviously, digital, we obviously always on campaigns. The kind of impact that we see on brand on television. So obviously there's a split between performance and brand when we do television. But when it comes to digital, it's purely performance driven. Increasingly though, we do believe that digital can also help build a brand, and at least support television and in helping build the brand and building contextuality. The kind of numbers that we look at chasing, we do need multimedia. We do need a multimedia approach to go ahead and acquire customers across different platforms. So
what's the call to action? When I see a ad on TV, what bridges the TV experience to grabbing my phone and saying, I want to get it now?
So at the core, I mean, you could, so I think most of us advertisers now probably say, get the app now, download free. But at the core is, what's in it for you? Right? When you're sitting there on your couch and watching television, what's in it for you that's going to make you grab that device and go ahead and download that app, right? You've got 5, are you going to get the 6th? That's the question that needs to be answered, I think. And in a simple, lucid manner, I think it needs to be put across to the consumer. The same thing even on digital as well. Most people think communication is only about television, but I think digital can really, really help explain to the consumer what's in it for the consumer as well. So in fact, it can almost do it in a better manner, in a more interactive manner. Giving him a sampling experience.
If you actually see the TVCs, right? I mean, nobody's possibly there's nobody doing a TVC and saying, okay, go download it now. There are some who are doing that, but I think the interesting thing in TVCs is that how the TVC is built around the mobile device, right? Like if you see the recent Amazon one, like this guy looking silly and going like that, right? Those are all all of that kind of helps. Has impacted this change of why in 2014 we've seen this massive shift of transactions on mobile, right? You don't have to call it out, but you just have to probably highlight the usefulness or the use case that you have. Like Ola was okay, get it now and run or whatever it was, right? So it was all made a lot of sense from a use case perspective that I would naturally do.
Right. So you're saying the market needs a lot of education. TV is still a preferred medium to address a very large audience. And if I can have a vivid demo, if you will, on that 30-second or 45-second spot, that goes a long way. So, just want to talk about a couple of other aspects. Let's assume you have the customer now, right? What does mobile first or mobile only do from a data perspective, right? And where have you found, blinding insights that your web presence didn't give you? Right? Can you talk to, so I guess you guys have also had a long history of users. So tell us about what's changed about how you think about either monetization, pricing, use cases. Where's that magic?
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference between the way either product thinking or marketing thinking, at least it's been a great learning experience for us, right? Like, that from a targeting standpoint, the kind of data that you have on mobile is like probably 10x more than that of the desktop, right? You know the device, you know the OS, you know the kind of use cases in terms of what he's doing at any point of time, right? So what we've seen just in terms of broad, the data itself is huge. And what we've seen from multiple categories that we have, if you have a high value kind of product, be it flights or hotels, for example, then it makes a lot of sense to invest on a OS like iOS, right? So Apple is still a predominant category when it comes to high value. When it comes to low value transactions or use cases, or high frequency kind of transactions, then Android is kind of probably 90%, right? So like buses, trains, etc. So depending on the use case, and like in some cases we have seen especially on the lower value, high frequency kind of transaction, Windows also kind of makes sense, right? So depending on, and with these kind of insights in terms of what to target, whom to target, now you can accordingly change your marketing campaign saying that if I'm targeting flights product, then these are the kind of consumers I want. So in some sense, the desktop from a marketing standpoint was heavily context driven, right? It was performance driven in terms of somebody searching from A to B or whatever. So you were always chasing the transaction. The mobile, I think, environment has kind of inverted that. You have to think, how do I acquire this type of customer? So the more data that you have to figure out what type of customer you have, then accordingly you can start targeting on the marketing side, right? So in some sense, the customer is now chasing a customer rather than a transaction.
And I don't know if you guys know, but I've had this experience where I've been fooling around on the Cleartrip app, trying to pick a destination, and I'm sitting around for 2 minutes. Suddenly my phone will ring, right? And it'll be somebody from Cleartrip saying, hey, were you trying to make a booking? The first time that happened, I was quite blown away. I was like, wow, they know exactly what I'm doing. Second time I was like, that's cool. You know, these guys actually are trying to help. That to me is uniquely thinking about connecting a mobile experience, right? So, Mahesh, do you want to add something?
And even in terms of the product thinking as well, right? A lot of this data now, you have the desktop, you have the web, you have the different OSs. Even from a roadmap standpoint, now I'm seeing, at least in our use case, the kind of features that we are kind of putting out on an iOS app versus an Android app versus a Windows app. I mean, these itself are kind of diverging, right? Which kind of talks about like what data can do and what richness of data. And on the desktop, you could not do that, right? Everybody, apart from session-related information, it was very hard when somebody comes to your app to kind of know what exactly he was kind of trying to do, right? So here, you have kind of, you can even go to the extent that you can change product roadmaps based on what the kind of user and the use cases, right? So which I think is amazing from
You want to touch
efficiency
Mahesh on
standpoint.
sort of kind of the really key product features that you think, you know, from a desktop to a mobile, you know, what uniquely can you leverage on a phone that makes you special?
Sure. On the data point, in fact, we have this raging debate internally. We sometimes wonder, are we a content company with great data or a data company with fantastic music? Right? That's the amount of data that we look at. Wi-Fi versus carrier usage, city-wise dispersion, for example. Where are people streaming music in India? In fact, we put out an infographic at the end of the year, last year, which I think a lot of media actually carried because it was the first time where people actually got to see, hey, these are active data streaming users coming from tier 2, tier 3 cities. So it bunked some of the myths that people don't use data in tier 2, tier 3 cities. Cluster, so music is, your music taste also defines your persona, right? So the kind of music that you listen to and the clusters of kind of music that people listen to at different parts of the day. In the morning, for example, people listen to a lot more devotional stuff. At night, for example, most Indians like to listen to old Kishore Kumar, R.D. Burman kind of stuff. And then drive time usage versus when you're back at home on the couch surfing. That kind of data point is pretty interesting to see. And then we've also started looking at native capabilities. So for example, in order to try and see whether the guy is on the move or stationary when he's listening to music, we actually look at the accelerometer on the device and try and derive from that the kind of streaming that the user is actually doing at this point in time. The other thing that's important.
Can you change like quality of service, or will you improve the bitrate?
I was just going to say that. So active bitrate streaming, which is trying to gauge the network strength and stream accordingly, is something that we do on an active basis. Okay. It's important in a country like India where the data network fluctuates pretty rapidly, even in tier 1 cities. So I think data can be used from different points of view. So marketing, the product angle in the form of active data streaming, and also from a brand point of view as well. What kind of content are people listening to? So what kind of brands want to associate at that point of time? So it's something that can be comprehensive, and you get a 360-degree kind of perspective from here.
So, like with data, I would summarize it as something saying that, okay, what you really get from mobile is two things: accuracy and insights. Right? When I say accuracy, let's say, why would I shut down a mobile web, right? Because for me, unless the user is logged in, the data is pretty much useless, right? However, if he does the same thing that he was trying to do on the mobile web on the app, then each of those things that the user does is captured. So it's the classical device ID versus cookie ID kind of a scenario, right? Where cookie ID is totally useless, and the same applies for web. So if I go to the web, I don't log in, pretty much that, you know, my costs of servicing that user, I didn't really realize the benefit of that, right? So accuracy to tag behaviors, you know, and that lead to insights, that's really the big advantage of why I would go like a mobile only or a mobile first.
Just to help, you know, some of the startups in the audience, are there any third-party, you know, platforms, tools that have made your journey easier? You know, whether it's data monitoring, data tracking, you know, just better UI tools. What are some of the things that you guys are using to get better at delivering a mobile first? And is it all internal, or are you leveraging some third-party tools?
I think we are leveraging a lot of tools, right from the process of mock-up creation to click mocks to actually prototyping. So there's of course lots of tools in the market. There's InVision and these kind of tools which allow you to create click mocks pretty rapidly and then test your designs. All the way to analytics, where we've tried actually 2 or 3 tools, and frankly speaking, none of them actually are able to give you insights beyond just the data. So at the end, you still need somebody who can look at these tools and then figure out what to do with them. So there's Flurry, there's Google Analytics, of course, Mixpanel. You can try any of these. All of them work well. But with all of them, you'll still have to put your brains together to figure out what's happening. One of the things, to answer your previous question, one of the things mobile enables you to do, which you couldn't do before, was people give you, a tremendous amount of access. Most people actually don't even bother to look at what kind of permissions your app is asking for. Now, on the flip side, you can do a lot with it. So, we have this app called the PNR app, which basically just sits on your phone. You give access to your SMS inbox, we figure out which trips you're taking, and then give you data that you might require that makes your life better, whether it's about a cancelled flight or a rescheduled train, or something that has happened in your destination that you need to be aware about, etc. So you can't do that easily on the web. Similarly, because you have access to location, suddenly for a traveler, the nearby use case becomes very interesting. So if I've reached Goa, I've landed there, and now I have 3 hours to kill, what are the places around where I can hang out? Is there some cool place around that I should check out? So places to visit, things to do, those kind of things, where location becomes very important. You can leverage that much more rapidly on mobile. And also context. So if I've actually booked a flight ticket or a train, I have a train PNR on my phone, I know precisely what time you're reaching your destination, because I can also track those delays, etc. And at the time you actually reach your destination, I can prompt you to book a cab in 1 click, right? You can't do that without having access to the amount of data that the phone provides you, right? So small things like that, I think, makes the consumer's life more simple. And I think the more predictive computing we all can do with our data, we can actually preempt what you want to do next. And so our home screens or our next screen can actually already propose that this is what you're more likely to do. But I think we are all one step away from that today, just trying to make a sense of the data and figuring out what are the models we need to build on top of it to build some sort of predictive intelligence, so that your experience and my experience are very different on the same app. Because that's where apps need to go to as a next step.
And on the tools question, I think there are a lot of specialized, meaning the kind of ecosystem is growing phenomenally, at least at Cleartrip. A few things which we use, which I think, in terms of customer experience, we are fanatical about things like crashes, etc. So Crashlytics is a great tool in terms of figuring out what crashes, at what point, etc. Right? So you want to kind of, because you're kind of getting the user, and one bad experience kind of gets you to uninstall the app. You don't want to kind of, so we track that closely. In terms of analytics, we use Localytics, which I think fairly works well just from an analytics standpoint. You can pretty much get, at the same time I agree with Alok that you need people to look at it, but I think it's a great tool in terms of how they push the envelope. In terms of engagement itself, which I think, to an earlier question, how do startups or smaller players kind of acquire customers? I think it's good to kind of acquire your probably 1,000, 2,000 customers, and you need to kind of work on retention. Like the entire app economy works on the fact that you have great retention, hence the lifetime value is kind of greater. So meaning you have Localytics, which is not as strong in terms of engagement. You have an Indian startup, MoEngage, which kind of does a great job in terms of figuring out how, at what point of time, personalized notifications, etc. that you can push. Then you have Branch, which if you want to kind of launch any referral kind of a program, or even just plain deep linking into your apps branches, kind of a great tool. So I think there are a lot of tools available, and these are the ones that have probably worked for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, so from a personalization point of view, right, in our case, music, for example, music is very personal. So one of the things that we're increasingly trying to do is each Saavn app experience is individual. So when I open my app on my device, there's content relevant to my tastes. And when you open your app, it's relevant to your taste. So it's tailored basis what you've been listening to, what you've indicated as your preferences, and increasingly getting more and more intelligent by the day. And I think that's so key from a user point of view.
So thanks guys for a fantastic panel. Hope you guys got something out of it. And we'll be around the rest of the day.